Welcome, good thinkers. Welcome, good thinkers, to Good Thinking Live. We're back Monday mornings, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Welcome, good thinkers from all around the world. Let us all know who you are and where you are from. Today, I am tuning in from the West Coast of the United States, the Pacific Northwest, where we are experiencing temperatures upwards of 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is hot, uncharacteristically hot. So I am here. I have my green screen set up for workshops later today and later this week. And I'm not changing it up because it's too hot to move. But welcome. I am so glad you're all here. Please, please, please be ready to participate and let everyone know who you are and where you're from, whether you're tuning in from LinkedIn Live or whether you're tuning in from YouTube Live. I think the LinkedIn Live people see the LinkedIn Live comments and the YouTube Live people see the YouTube comments. All right, first question, today's topic. What's a miracle? Second question, do you believe in miracles? So let us know. I'm going to keep going as your comments come in. We'll start getting really interactive. But let's start with, what is a miracle? And do you believe in miracles? I believe in miracles. I don't believe in miracles. What do you think? All right. So a miracle is defined as a highly extraordinary or improbable event that brings very welcome consequences. So we'll use that kind of loose definition of a miracle. It's something that happens that's highly improbable or even extraordinary, and it brings us very welcome consequences. Usually we don't describe a miracle as something that happens that we don't like. Now, if you think back on something that happened in your life, you think, wow, that was a miracle. Can you recall the last thing, if you do believe in miracles, can you recall the last thing that you considered a miracle? Anything. I'm going to say hi to Stephen. Greetings. This reveals. Greetings from the city forecasted to reach 115 degrees Fahrenheit today. Yes, Stephen is here in Portland, also hot, hot, hot. And we have got Charles from Fort Worth, Texas. And we have got, let's see, welcome Charles, welcome Tim. Tim, great to see you. Thank you. You enjoyed the LinkedIn Learning course on critical thinking. I'm so glad that you will be doing your first LinkedIn Live today. So welcome. I think you're going to enjoy it. From New York. What's fun about LinkedIn Live is you'll start to see a lot of people filtering in from all over the world, which gives a great perspective. And good thinkers from all over the world give different kinds of perspectives, which is one of the necessary elements of good thinking. All right, we've got someone from Mumbai. Now, sometimes it just says LinkedIn Learning user. So if you want to put your name in there in the chat, then we will be able to welcome you with your name. But welcome, everyone. All right, so we're going to get into miracles. So there is this conception or this challenge, or maybe perhaps misconception, that coincidences must have meaning. Like, things just can't happen random. But we know in mathematics and physics and science and in kind of every aspect, randomness is a huge part of our lives. Randomness is a huge part of our lives. So the misconception that coincidences must have meaning is a very strong one, even though coincidences are a routine part of our lives and miracles are often figments of our imagination. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have this imagination or be appreciative or grateful for these good coincidences that seem to happen. The problem really it becomes a problem when it becomes such a strong part of our decision making that we fall victim to cognitive biases and logical fallacies. So I'm going to, Mustafa from Palestine. Welcome, Mustafa. Palak from Mumbai. Thank you for putting your name in. Welcome, Mustafa, and welcome, Palak. All right. So back in 1913, if you were standing at the roulette wheel in Monte Carlo, you would have seen that the ball hit on the black 26 times in a row. So what are the odds of the ball hitting black 26 times in a row? Well, you have to start with what are the odds of the ball hitting black. So the ball hitting black is about, well, it's less than 50% because you've got the 0 and the double 0 in roulette. So it's maybe 47.5%, 47.4%. The odds of hitting black versus, or the odds of hitting red are a little less than 50%. But the odds of hitting black 26 times in a row, the odds are like 1 in 67 million or something like that, some ridiculous number. So here's your question. What are the odds? Now you're going to spin the wheel. What are the odds of your spin? It's just hit black 26 times. What are the odds of you hitting that ball into the black? What are the odds on that spin? Anyone want to take a guess? Meanwhile, I'm going to welcome Animesh from India. Welcome, Animesh. Animesh is a regular good thinker on the show. So I love seeing all the regulars and I love seeing the new good thinkers. Jolan, welcome from Germany. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Jolan, probably German with the J, probably right, but you can let me know. Did I pronounce that right? Welcome, Jolan. So anyone want to take a stab at the odds? What are the odds of the next roulette wheel landing on black? Well, the odds are the same as any one spin. But what happened as people stood by that roulette wheel, they're like, okay, it's landed on black 26 times in a row. We're going to bet on red. And Monte Carlo cleaned up that day because that represents, or that highlights a very common fallacy that is related to all kinds of biases and all kinds of kind of pattern making errors that we humans make, which is this hot hand or the gambler's fallacy. Like, oh, today's a good day. It's a hot hand. I have a hot hand. Or conversely, it's landed on black 26 times. There's no way that the next spin can't land on red. So the odds are, Stephen says, the odds are high because it appears the wheel is broken. Well, there could be that because even though, you have randomness supposedly in Monte Carlo, maybe there was some kind of little trick that they were pulling. But assuming no sneaky behavior on the part of the house, maybe the wheel was broken. And I've even done that myself when I've gone to Las Vegas and I'm not a big gambler, but maybe I'll put like a quarter in the slot machine. And I think, ooh, which one's the loose machine? If this one paid out, then this one's not likely to pay out, or this one's more likely to pay out. This is the clustering illusion bias, where we see patterns in things that just aren't there. Now, here's the deal. Seeing patterns in things is how we make sense of the world. So our brains are designed to see patterns in things. Where it becomes a problem is when we see patterns that aren't there and we're not aware of the fact that this is something playing tricks on us. So it's not to say that you discredit anything where you start to see patterns in material, whatever. It's just having an awareness that this can lead us astray. So this gets to another question. Ready? All right. What are the chances of something that happens 1 in a million times? How often do you think that could happen to you? If something has a 1 in a million chance of happening, how often do you think that could happen to you? And that's just a little tricky way of saying, of kind of leading into, I should say, Littlewood's law, which also relates to the law of really large numbers. So if you have a huge set of events and you go looking for patterns in those events, a huge data set, and you go looking for patterns in a very, very large data set, you're going to find patterns, because especially if you are going after the data is all there and you're, p-hacking the data, you're going to look for data that isn't there. All right. So we're going to get into Littlewood's law of numbers, but I want to see Tim says, I have a real world miracle that happened to me once while I was a study abroad program in Italy. Let's see. I was demonstrating a magic card trick to a friend and a fellow student. And while I had, of course, correctly identified the card before presenting to him, I improvised in the last second. And while I knew it was an 8 of hearts, before showing it to him, I told him, my guess is that you were born on November 8th, and that's why you chose the 8 of hearts. To which he astonishingly revealed, I think you're going to say, that his birthday was November 8th. Is that right? All right. So there are some events where you're like, there is no explanation. And maybe there's an explanation if we were able to perceive all the things going on in our world. Maybe there wouldn't be an explanation, and there are random events. But the point isn't to negate the fact that there are random events. The point is to understand that random events don't necessarily come infused with deep meaning. So that's just a little bit of skepticism, which hints at how you can avoid falling prey to this. And let me get into Littlewood's law of miracles. Okay, so assuming you're alert for about 8 hours a day and something happens to you every second, little things, I mean, it doesn't have to be big things, but little things happen to you every second, you will experience 1 million events about every 35 days. And this means that when you say that the chances of happening are 1 in a million, it also means about once a month. Now, it doesn't mean that the chances of winning the lottery of 1 in a million, you're going to win a lottery once a month. That's not how it works. But this has to do with, in the course of your normal life, miracles or astonishing events happen at a rate of about 1 time per month. And the proof of the law is pretty simple. So what we do is we see and hear things that are happening at a rate of about 1 per second. And when they seem extraordinary, we tell people, which infuses it with more meaning, and they tell people, and they tell people, and they tell people. So it's just a way mathematically of acknowledging that these kind of events where we could bring a lot of meaning to them, and I'm not saying that you should ignore them, but it's just a matter of how much meaning you should give to them, to the point where it could lead you astray. And we'll talk about that in just a second, that these events happen about once a month. And this law of truly large numbers goes back to, in really large samples, you can go looking and you will find wildly outrageous occurrences in very large samples. And then when you notice these coincidences or miracles, or however you label them, we tell people. And sometimes it makes it into the news. If it's a really miraculous thing, maybe it makes it into the news. And when we don't, like, let's say that Tim, you did this and you were doing the show with the 8 of hearts or whatever, and you don't really think or remember all the times that you didn't identify someone's birthday. So it kind of like it infuses the meaning of that November 8th birthday it gives it more meaning perhaps. And again, it's fun to think of it as a miracle, and I'm not taking that away or suggesting. It's just acknowledging that randomness doesn't always come. It doesn't come infused with meaning necessarily. All right. So this law has to do with this cognitive bias that is given a lot of names. One of the names is apophenia. So apophenia is refusing to believe in clutter and noise and chance and putting random events into a story narrative. And our brains are, addicted to story. So any lesson that you can tell that involves a story, we're going to infuse the events with much more meaning. And then there are particular stories that it's like, for our brains, it's like sugar, it's like candy, it's like we can't. So apophenia is when you completely see things happening in random events. And it doesn't have to be harmful. But it can be very harmful, to the point where if you start to see meaning in a lot of random events, that is actually associated with a paranoid schizophrenia. So it's just when you see, oh, that person looked at me and that bird flew over here and all of that happened on a Tuesday at 8 o'clock. And I notice things like that always happen on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock. And that becomes kind of part of what drives your decision making. It can go from a kind of a fun thing to something debilitating, mentally debilitating. And some examples are seeing religious symbols in toasted bread. I think someone saw Prince Charles' future wife in a jelly bean. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So let me ask you, do you recall even maybe something personal where you saw something that was miraculous or experienced something, or you read about someone who saw some miracle in some inanimate object? Anyone have any of those examples? Because this is a cognitive bias that prevents us from thinking rationally. It prevents us from good thinking. Just acknowledging that, okay, the chances of this bread, if you look and see a face in the bread smiling back at you, I mean, in so many toasts and pieces of toast, you could probably find different characters, a rabbit, a religious figure, etc., that your brain pattern makes. And related to correlation is not causation. So these are all, let's see, we've got some more comments. Let's see, we're scrolling here. Animesh says, we can link it with confirmation bias. Yes, we can. Actually, we can, brilliant. Rubber chickens, where are the rubber chickens? We can link this. Animesh gets a rubber chicken for that because we can link it to the clustering illusion. We can link it to confirmation bias. When we believe that evidence is there and we go searching for it, we find it. So we'll talk about how it is related to some of these things. There is a subcategory of apophenia where people see these visual stimuli, kind of like the faces in the toast and stuff like that. And, we talked about the gambler's fallacy. We perceive patterns or meaning in random numbers. Part of it is, statistics are hard because sometimes statistics are highly counterintuitive. When you think about that Monte Carlo, 26 black hits, what are the chances of the next spin hitting black? It's hard not to say, well, the chances have to go down after 26 spins. No, but every spin is an independent event. I mean, assuming that it's not a broken machine. So this gambler's fault. We always hear about the clustering illusion. Correlation is not causation. So here's these spurious correlations. So this is one of the big things that leads to confirmation bias, that leads to conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories are probably the most common type of apophenia. And this is where people see meaningful patterns in events or information that are likely unrelated. Now, that doesn't mean that when you see a grain of truth here and a grain of truth here, and you start collecting evidence that, there's no way it could happen. It just means that we are likely to believe conspiracy theories when we don't consider the very, very pervasive, very common, and always there randomness in life. And the Rorschach ink blot. How many of you have ever taken one of those Rorschach ink blot tests? That was the psychological test that doctors would show patients. I don't know if does anyone know if they still even use these ink blots? But they would show patients and they would ask the patient to interpret meaning from the ink blots. And these tests were to gain insight into patients' minds through their pattern recognition. Okay, so Animesh says, many times you start an analysis by fixing the end in mind. Numbers just measure up and patterns start emerging. Absolutely. I mean, Animesh absolutely hits it on the head. It's also very common in where you p-hack, where you don't start with a hypothesis. You start by collecting data. You see all the data, and then you start making meaning out of it. And then you say, hey, look what this data shows us. Whereas you're supposed to start with a hypothesis. And if it's disproven, then that's science. You say, okay, that hypothesis. You don't go then saying, now that I've collected this data and this hypothesis was disproven, I'm going to go look for a hypothesis that will match the data. So that's a very, very common, that's kind of unfortunately a very common thing, even in science and a lot of social science, where there is p-hacking, where you start with a conclusion or you start with the conclusion, then you go try to find the evidence, or you gather the evidence and then go find the conclusion. So these are just important things to acknowledge and understand as part of our everyday lives. Okay, so does anyone have an example of when they're like, okay, no way, I don't care what you say, Becky. I don't care. I know that there's randomness, but this happened and this is a miracle, or this happened and this is a conspiracy. Does anyone have an example where no matter how much you fix your brain on the fact that randomness could be just the cause, just it's random, how many of you there's something in your life where you just can't seem to break out of the fact that this is a pattern that has to be there? Anything? Anyone? I mean, I have to constantly, I see patterns in things. Of course, you try to see patterns in things. It's how we make sense of the world. So we would all be forgiven because we would be just clueless walking around. But to infuse meaning is where there are these kind of random things. It's good to realize this element of randomness. Okay, so we're going to go quickly through avoiding this type 1 error that shows where variables are related when they're not. We're going to go through a few tips so that you can just check yourself. Just check yourself. Okay, so Hussein says the advantage of random people enjoying their day in their own way, and I am not one of them. Okay, that's awesome. All right, yes, exactly. The advantage of random people enjoying their day. All right, so how are we going to avoid just bringing this knowledge of the clustering illusion, the gambler's fallacy, the law of really large numbers, or apophenia? How are we going to prevent that from ruling and maybe leading us astray, ruling our lives and leading us astray? Well, number one, as good thinkers know, you have to be a proper skeptic. Now, that doesn't mean that you're a cynic. It doesn't mean that you're negative about every miraculous thing. You can appreciate the good things that happen, these extraordinary, unlikely things that happen to you. You can totally appreciate those things and be grateful that the randomness fell into your lap in a positive way. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about skepticism. We're talking about skepticism is avoiding sloppy thinking. And informed skepticism is the ability to ask the right questions. Bring curiosity to your decision making. Bring curiosity to your sense making, your life sense making. Research shows that eyewitness testimony is among the most least reliable forms of evidence and is maximally susceptible to bias. Yet, when we see with our eyes, we think, not me, I'm definitely more spot on. So bringing that skepticism that what we perceive is never really all that there is, and that's okay. We don't have to fill it in with magical thinking. We can, as long as we acknowledge that that may be something that we're doing, that randomness may be at play. The ability to recognize this bias is kind of the second one. So bringing the skepticism and awareness of this bias. This bias is also related to just worlds hypothesis, where things have to happen in this just way. So meritocracy or whatever. So people will get their just desserts at some point. Maybe it's in this life. Maybe people believe it will happen in that life. So this just world hypothesis, and understanding that, again, this randomness, this unexplained randomness is a part of our existence, is a part of life. And then the final thing is to analyze your assumptions. Analyze our assumptions, because we're typically more aware of our assumptions than our biases. So it's easier to say, okay, what are we assuming here, than it is to say, this is our bias. It's hard to see our own bias. But guess where it's really easy to see bias? In other people. Super easy. And that's the blind spot bias. That's the bias of all biases. So maybe you set aside the biases because you say, I don't believe that that's a bias, but you can then challenge your assumptions, because it's risky to assume that all of your assumptions in your decision process are correct. Test your hypothesis. If you're going to make an investment and you are looking at mutual fund managers and you see a mutual fund manager that for the last years has beaten the odds, he's beaten the markets, you might think that's a hot hand, or that mutual fund manager knows something that other mutual fund managers don't. And there may be some ability among mutual fund managers, but the market has too many variables to hold constant. So you do have to kind of attribute some of that to randomness. So tell that to the people who invested in Bernie Madoff's great hot hand that he had before it turned out that that wasn't random. That was something very different than random. That was like a broken roulette machine, right? So this widespread misunderstanding of randomness can cause us a lot of problems. And as much as we love a story, beware of focusing too heavily on the story's conclusion, because particularly when the story evokes a strong emotion, it makes us really feel like, wow, that was really a miracle. Beware of allowing that belief or that thought to entice us into ignoring or infusing the reliability of that conclusion with too much miracle and too little randomness. I mean, if it sounds sweet or miraculous, we want to believe it, but our intuition is not prone to doubt. So for good thinking to flourish, it should be. Our intuition has to be prone to doubt. And part of that is acknowledging and recognizing the role of randomness. So hopefully this was fun. I hope you tune in next week. Next week, we have a pretty cool show in store. I will be posting Monday morning. I'll be posting a little before the show, Monday morning, 9 a.m. You can tune in right here to LinkedIn. Or live, or if you're watching the show afterwards, we'll be looking at all your comments. So definitely, if you're watching not live, be sure to participate. And also, if you want to subscribe to YouTube Live to be there and get notifications, you can go to my YouTube channel, Becky Saltzman, and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. And we will see all of you good thinkers next week. Stay cool if you're on the West Coast of the United States. Whew, it's hot.